Pauline Rose. I know many of you. My name is Rosalind Parks-Ratanchi. I'm a principal research associate in the clinical school and co-chair of the global health theme at Public Health at Cambridge with Caroline Trotter. But I also only work part-time in Cambridge because I spend most of my time, the majority of my time, running something called the Academy of Health Innovation at the Infectious Disease Institute in Makerere. So I'm back and forward a lot. But it's a pleasure to be here today. I'm sorry Pauline can't be with you because she's not well. But it's great to be here. So what I would like to do is to introduce the moderator of our next panel, Roger Mosey, who is Master of Selwyn since 2013 and Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the university. But for those of us who spend a lot of time on the continent, his previous career at the BBC is what got me very excited and started my kind of hero worship, because he was previously editorial director of the BBC, which I imagine is a kind of godlike status at the BBC, I would guess. And also, you know, producer on some of Radio 4 and Radio 5's great programs as editor. And so we would like to hand over to him to ably chair and moderate this panel. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I can assure you that when you're editorial director of the BBC, generally nobody takes much notice of you, which is probably the way it should be. But anyway, this session I'm hugely looking forward to because it's my favourite thing in a way, which is to hear from PhD students about their research and what they're up to. And in a moment, I'm going to invite them all to give us a very brisk run of about a minute through the headlines of what their research is about. But let me introduce them. So Chilombo Musa, who is, generally speaking, a land economist. You can correct me and give me the detail and texture in a bit more detail. Yaw Ansong Snr is in medicine, and he says the intersection of medicine, surgery, and engineering. Edward Murambwa is studying for a PhD in politics and international studies. And then Peace Adesina, who has a great virtue of going to Selwyn College, is a chemical engineer, I think is the headline, is your subject area. So I'm going to talk a bit later about opportunities and potentially barriers in Cambridge. But I think I'd like them all now to give us that 1 minute guide to what their research is about. So Chilombo, would you like to go first?
Good afternoon, everyone, and yeah, thanks so much. I always like talking about my research. So my study is basically focused on informal settlements in Zambia, and what I look at is the emergence of housing markets. So I'm particularly interested in how low-income households navigate property markets in informal settlements, and by informal settlements, I'm referring to what you would call slums. And so they emerge as an illegal settlement. But then within that illegality, there is a market mechanism that emerges. And so my research is focused on understanding those market mechanisms and how they facilitate access to land and housing for low-income households.
Brilliant. Jack.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So my research is focused on leveraging electric fields for regrowth of the cells of the spinal cord. Now, the cells of the spinal cord are called neurons. Currently, when there is damage to the spinal cord, most of the time, what is done now is essentially improve activities of daily living for the person. But therapy is not focused on actually attempting to cure the spinal cord injury. Indeed, there are many promising therapies. But to the best of my knowledge, as of now, there is no cure for spinal cord injury. So my research is focused on evidence-based medicine as well as advancements in engineering to attempt to cure people with spinal cord injuries.
Thank you very much. Edward.
Thank you. So my name is Edward Murambwa from the great nation of Zimbabwe. So I'm looking at the idea of targeted sanctions, actually critiquing the idea of targeted sanctions, because I think in the past we have always talk of comprehensive sanctions and how they sort of harm the ordinary population, and then the move to targeted sanctions trying to punish the culprits. But what I'm trying to look at is actually, are they any different? Who gets affected? And in the context of Zimbabwe, where the sanctions have been there for almost 20 years, why are they still there if they are effective? Also, we can then talk of how do you measure success? How do you measure something as being effective in the context of sanctions? But yeah, so in a nutshell, I'm trying to look at, and you might have seen what's happening with Russia, that many people have been targeted, but are the effects going to remain on the specific targets, or they will spill over to other ordinary populace?
Peace.
Hi, my name is Peace Adishina. I'm from the great nation of Nigeria. So we know that carbon dioxide is like the major driver of climate change and global warming. And so there are some technologies that are very difficult to remove their emissions. Those are the hard-to-abate technologies. And so what we're trying to do is to develop a technology that can integrate a carbon conversion system with those technologies, so that the carbon dioxide that is being produced from these industries can then be converted into value-added products and fuels like methanol, ethanol, which can be used, and also like other value-added chemicals like ethylene, which is a raw material in chemical industry. And for the carbon conversion system, there are many technologies that can be used, but the most promising one is the electrochemical reduction of CO2, and that just involves you using electricity and chemical reactions to convert carbon dioxide into these valuable products. But the problem is that there are many parameters. And lastly, not to run through, the electricity that is being used is going to come from renewable energy. So it's renewable energy driven, and you have water, and you have all of those sustainable systems to create a sustainable carbon cycle. So my work here is just to try to model this system such that we could use computations to optimize the different parameters, because there are about a lot of parameters, like 20 parameters. So we are fusing in experimental data, which creates some sort of realism with the models, and then that gives us a robust model. But then, because these are run on very computational, highly computational softwares, you need machine learning to kind of ease the computational cost. And so that's what my work is about, in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you so much for those nutshells. What I'm interested in is a theme already is what we fashionably call interdisciplinarity, and the way that you work across different departments. And yeah, you sort of picked it out a bit more in the sense of medicine and engineering, and clearly electronics, as you were saying. How easy is that? Is that something that comes naturally, or do you have to work quite hard to get at it?
I guess, so it requires a lot of, as you said, it's very cross-disciplinary. So for me, I'd say fortunate to have a medical background. And I've also taught myself. I've read a lot about, a lot of engineering, informally, but I've also been, I've had the privilege to be formally trained as well at Imperial College. And I've also had the opportunity in engineering. And I've also had the opportunity to work with very talented colleagues in the engineering department. So I guess it makes it quite easy in terms of working in this very niche area, because obviously you know who to go to if you need help. Yeah.
And how difficult did you find it to get Cambridge to work together? Because we often think Cambridge is really quite silo-driven, and that people don't really break across boundaries. Was that something you found easy to do, or Peace? I mean, it sounds like you were...
Okay, I feel you have to do the work to meet people in order to get them to work together with people. If you don't, we have a different system in Africa where, like, even if you're not in people's business, they will come into your business. But in the UK, you have to, like, actively try to work with people to create that collaboration sense.
And Chilombo, land economy we tend to think of as being quite interdisciplinary anyway, because it goes into law and planning and environment. Was that maybe one of the easier departments to get that kind of collaboration?
Well, it should be, but to be honest, like Peace, it's not that easy. People still work in silos, I would say, and so you have to make very deliberate efforts to collaborate and reach out to other academics. With land economy being so multidisciplinary, it also makes it a little more challenging because people then tend to work on very niche topics. And so to find that sort of synergy where your research can be input in another person's research requires quite a lot of effort from yourself and also willingness from others in the department to collaborate with you.
Edward, I'd like to ask you a slightly broader question, which is, obviously your work on sanctions has focused initially on Zimbabwe. Sanctions are a big global topic at the moment. How transferable is that to making an impact with your original piece of research into what is a hugely contentious global topic?
Okay. Yeah, you are right, and I don't think they are going to, people are going to stop using sanctions anytime soon because they are thought to be playing the middle ground between diplomatic approach and military intervention. So they always play that middle ground. And obviously, they are also thought to be humane way of intervention. So whilst I'm looking at Zimbabwe specifically, I think whatever happens with sanctions is transferable to the global world, because I think if you look at, as I said earlier on, what's happening in Russia, the framework or the idea behind sanctions is going to be the same, whether you apply them in Zimbabwe, in Nigeria, or in Russia, particularly with the idea of targeted sanctions. You are trying to avoid harming the ordinary person in the street. But so locality doesn't really matter. It's what happens afterwards. And talk maybe about the interdisciplinary of the disciplines. You actually look at, from where I'm working at, you've got law that's involved. So how do you sanction, like in the case of Mugabe, who was a sitting president, how do you sanction a sitting president? Their diplomatic immunity, how do you find ways around that? You also look at the history, because they don't just come. There's a history involved. So in the case of Zimbabwe, I look at right from the unilateral declaration of independence in 1965. You can see a trend of things that might have led to sanctions. So there's always a way of getting to know someone who is working around issues of, let's say, history and law, or in my case, in politics.
I know we're among friends here, so this next section, you can be completely honest about both opportunities of Cambridge and barriers in Cambridge. So what are the things that make it exciting and stimulating to work here? What are the frustrations of it? And I don't know who wants to go first on this.
Ladies first.
Yeah, okay, you're volunteering.
Okay, I'm happy to go first.
Okay, you go first, yeah.
So the opportunities in Cambridge, it's very exciting to work with. There are so many talented people. Many, like I make a deliberate effort to always speak with someone I meet. And it's very inspiring to hear what people are doing. Like, you can always learn from everyone, and personally, this is the environment I wanted, the fact that I can be challenged just by hearing what others are doing. So there are very, very talented people here. That's where the opportunities are. As far as the problems I've noticed so far, I guess it's a problem that comes with being in a hyper-competitive environment where people are so good to the extent that sometimes it can create a bit of a conflict, so that's the problem I've noticed so far regarding Cambridge.
And is that a problem created by the university or by fellow students, or where does it come from?
Tough question. I think it's more of the fellow students. I think it's this whole idea of, I'm in Cambridge, so people tend to feel more special, because Cambridge is a very good university, to be honest. And to be honest, when you listen to people, it's not that they have words, they have actions to back their words. You listen to people and they are doing so many impressive things, so you can understand, oh, okay, that's why he's saying that. So.
Okay, Chilombo, opportunities and barriers. You can choose.
Yeah, so for opportunities, the diversity in Cambridge, I think it's a great opportunity to learn outside your field. I think Cambridge has people who are doing research in so many other different topics, but in addition to that, Cambridge brings in speakers from around the world. So people you would not have access to otherwise. So being in this Cambridge bubble, you're exposed still to the wider research and other topics that are being undertaken around the world. So I think that's one of the greatest opportunities. And you might think that a topic may not relate to your subject or the research that you're doing, but there's always a way that you can pick up one thing, whether it's the methods or the context within a certain research is being undertaken. So it's the diversity of topics that for me has been has contributed to my research and just enjoying Cambridge in general. And in terms of the barriers, I would say that I would go back to collaboration, to be honest, because I think that's very important. And this is why we're here at Cambridge Africa. I think it's to ensure that there is collaboration. And collaboration in the context of Africa and the global north, or the global south and the global north, in particular knowledge production. When we study certain phenomena in the global south, in my experience, we're studying it from the lens of experiences and theories from the global north. And so if you're studying, for example, informal settlements for me, theories on new institution economics or from sociology have been developed within the global north context. And when we say we should be specific, we should be context specific, in my opinion, that context specificity refers to supplanting theories that have been developed in the global north and then adjusting them to the context in the global south and not necessarily knowledge production from the global south. And that's what I think we should be working towards, developing theories based on knowledge production, the indigenous knowledge that we heard about earlier. I think that's what we should be striving for, and not supplanting and matching theories to fit a particular context.
Peace, opportunities and barriers.
Okay, I think the opportunities will be the quality of education, the pace at which you receive it, and also the quality of the professors I've got to work with is just immense. And then the barriers will be, I think for an African, will be integration, because when you first come in, you're not used to lots of things like the buses, the bicycles, and if you live in the city, so you have to learn on your own, and and I mean, it may not be that, it's not a rosy journey, honestly. Like the first few years will be difficult, but then you get used to it. And so I think the integration should be more, maybe people can be a lot more nicer yeah, so that would be the barriers, I think.
Okay, and Edward?
Well, I think the good thing about speaking last is that everyone would have said what's on your mind. But yeah, I would concur with Peace that, Cambridge can be very lonely as well. And in my case, I think I last met my cohort in 2019 when we had a compulsory module that we had to take in our first year. And since then, I only met one, apart from my close friends. Other than that, you don't know what they are doing, where are they, and how they are progressing. But as far as the, how best can I put this? The advantages, of being here, I think first thing goes to, to the college system. I find it quite good, to be honest, because my college was very supportive over the years. So I think it's one of, I made modeling, by the way, and they were really nice. So I think that's one thing. But again, it goes to the integration. The first day that I walked in there, I wanted to go and collect my student card at the student center. And I asked, okay, how do I access this? And I was just, okay, I'd take this street and you find your way, So I think that integration, how do you come from a place where maybe you know things, how they function, and then you're thrown into the deep end. How do you make your life worth living in that space? But other than that, yes, it's the professors that you work with, also the people that you meet. When you go around, you just find that everyone has something to offer, and I guess in any place we can learn, but Cambridge is also great in its own right. And
you've told me that also there are feelings coming into the country of being unwelcome at times, that it's just difficult to get the right visas and forms and...
Yeah, it's and I think someone shouted that it's not all rosy, and that's the honest truth. For you to to come, you have to do your health surcharge, and not everyone can afford that. It's actually a hassle for you to get to a point where you've got all the funds. It's like I was talking to my tutor at first that, yes, someone has got the funding to come to Cambridge, but then you've got to spend maybe 2,000, 3,000 pounds before you can get the visa, because you want your health surcharge, you want your insurance and all that. So to put all that together, those are challenges that one has to face. Even the English system itself, the English language requirement, which can be quite expensive for some people. And to have that, maybe in places where they don't speak English, you can understand that you want to really gauge whether they can thrive in an environment that's English dominated. But I would say for someone who's coming, let's say from South Africa, from Nigeria, where basically if someone has got to the level of earning a master's degree while studying in Nigeria, and then you put that stringent, I find it, a barrier to use my other language.
I'm going to look for prompts on how much longer we have, because we could keep going. Oh, 2 minutes. Oh gosh, because I was going to say we could keep. Well, fine. We could keep going forever. Can I just ask you, what more could the colleges or the university do to make studying for a PhD here, especially if you don't originally come from the UK? How could we make it better?
I think being very deliberate about creating communities, I think is important. Integration is great, but there is comfort that is found in people like you. For example, I'm from a college in Mary Edwards, which is a women-only college, and it made me very comfortable being there. Not that I don't like men, but it just was very welcoming, and I think the college was particularly very intentional about making sure that we were comfortable as women in Cambridge, and had targeted interventions to what women need in Cambridge. For example, reproductive health services. I think that's very important. And so I think colleges should be very deliberate to ensure that the integration within Cambridge as African scholars, within the context of the African scholar who has not studied outside their country, and matching them with other scholars from either their country or from Africa. I think that mentoring programs, I think, would go a long way to ensuring that integration is much more seamless.
Yeah?
Yeah, I agree partly. I agree with everything she said. So one of the barriers, which has also been touched on, for instance, is with the fees. It takes a lot to actually get into Cambridge. The application fee alone, I think was it was 70 plus pounds to the best of my knowledge. And this is very expensive for many people. So things like application fee waiver, I think it will go a long way to help people. And I know, I heard there are talks to waiver application fees. I hope it goes very well. I think it's already been done. But I thought it was a step in the right direction. The other point which has been touched on again is on mentorship. I feel people do not have the confidence to apply for universities like Cambridge. Personally, I say this without feeling embarrassed that when I was in high school, I know people who were way better than I am, but they have never had the courage to apply to a school like Cambridge, just because they think you need to be very special to come to a place like Cambridge. Of course, it requires a lot of hard work. It's not a walk in the park. So I guess mentorship programs to educate these people will go a long way in helping solve some of these barriers.
Final words from Peace and then from Edward, Peace.
Okay, I think the initial mentorship when you first get into Cambridge, like if you find someone that could just help you around to locate your way around, that would be good. Yeah, and I think that Cambridge is beautiful that you just forget about the problems and you just thrown into the deep end, and then you just have to work. And yeah, so I think that would be, yeah.
Edward?
Yeah, I think being more sensitive to maybe cultural differences, because someone once said, I only get to experience, like fully at home when I go to Wolfson when they've got their BOP, before COVID, we used to go there as well. So, I think spaces like this, I just met someone today, and we're now talking, oh, you were in South Africa, because that's where I studied the most. So we're now talking about all these experiences from the other side. So I think being aware that maybe people are coming from different places, and how do we bring them in? How do we make them feel at home? So being aware of those differences can make a difference.
You have just nudged me on one thing, because when we welcome our new graduate students at the start of each year, I list all the countries that they come from, and I'm enormously proud that we have usually 30 or 35 countries. I think this has been a quite interesting session about making sure that you customize welcomes and make sure that people from different experiences all feel equally at home in Cambridge. And I think that's something I'd certainly take away. But I think the most important thing about this session is just what amazing work you're doing, and congratulating you on being able to sort of nail the research in a minute with my rather unfair challenge at the beginning. And we wish you all the very best for the future, and thanks very much for the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'd just also like to echo my thanks to Roger for moderating, and all the students again for sharing. We know that it's not that easy to stand in a room full of this and talk about the things that have been difficult. So thank you very much for sharing those insights with us. Thanks.